Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. It is Wednesday morning, December 15th, 2021. Had to double check the date. Glad to see folks joining on the stream. There's Gail. There's Connie. Well, thanks, Connie. I hope you are able to benefit from it in some way. Good morning, Brian. Good to see you today. We're also cross-posted onto the Near Churches page. We're ready to start today in Exodus chapter 9. Exodus chapter 9, and we are working our way through the 10 plagues based on the statement found in Exodus 12 and verse 12, where when instituting the Passover, God says this, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." So, now this is, so hey Anna, good morning Michelle. So that statement there, as recorded in Exodus 12:12, preceded the 10th plague. Okay, we understand that. Good morning, Diana. But when you look at these plagues and you learn a little bit about the polytheism of Egypt, ancient Egypt, you learn that they worshipped just about everything that was struck in or during, let's say, these 10 plagues. Now, yeah, so anyway, it's like I said, that was that statement made before the 10th plague, but the Egyptians worshipped everything. Quite literally, it would be comparable, I would say biblically, it would be comparable to what we see in Acts 17 when Paul went to the city of Athens. They worshipped everything. And when you begin looking at the details of their gods and goddesses, it's interesting to note the connections that you can make with what they worshipped, along with what was struck in the 10 plagues. So like I said, we are going to Exodus chapter, starting in chapter 9 today. So I'm going to pull this back up here so I can see it. So we covered the history of how Israel got into Egypt. We're not going to go through that again. Yesterday, we looked at well, you see I've got 5 points here, but we looked at the first 4 plagues. Now, there was a sign given before the plagues began, and that was when Moses and Aaron were in the presence of Pharaoh, and God caused their rods to become a serpent. Well, the Egyptian magicians, sorcerers, were able to do that same thing, but then you remember that Aaron and Moses' rod swallowed up the rod of the magician, which showed the superiority of the God of Moses and Aaron. And so we looked at the water to blood, the frogs, the lice, and the flies. We covered that yesterday. And some of those accounts are a bit longer. The account number 4 there of the lice was a bit shorter. And some of the accounts today are a bit shorter. So I think we'll read the text surrounding those, and then we will address any questions or comments as we go along. So the 5th plague, and this begins in Exodus chapter 9, was a plague against the livestock. All right, so Exodus chapter 9, I want to start reading in verse 1. And there's a couple of reasons I want to start reading. Number 1, these are shorter accounts, comparatively speaking, to some of the others so far. But there are some details, like I told you yesterday, as the processes of these 10 plagues develop further, there are things that come out that weren't previously, so far as we have recorded, revealed to us. So Exodus 9, beginning in verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh and tell him, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will be upon your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, and on the camels, the oxen, the sheep, a very severe pestilence." So, okay, a strike against the livestock of Egypt. Now, there's a difference made here, as we've already noted in the previous plagues, but verse 4 says, "And the Lord will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt. So nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel." And again, when you get into livestock and cattle, plagues, if you will, or disease can spread pretty rapidly if it's not handled. Well, there's going to be a line drawn, essentially, between the issues with the livestock of Egypt and the issues of, no issues being among the livestock of the Israelites. Well, as you look into Egyptian history, you know that they had a sacred bull that they worshipped, and his name was, again, I don't know how to pronounce these, I'm not an Egyptian, Apis or Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis. He was the god of fertility and bounty. You know, and again, you think of livestock, you think of a food source, you think of the ability to perhaps trade or barter, let's say, clothing. So there are several things that are connected with the ownership of livestock. Wealth, of course, is there. So as a god of fertility and bounty, all right, well, you get to Exodus 9 and verse 6, it says, "So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died." Well, to me, one of the things that kind of stands out here is the immediacy of this plague. They're struck and they die on the next day from when Moses and Aaron were in the presence of Pharaoh. But of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. And again, when you think of how quickly disease can spread among animals, that's quite an interesting difference. Remember, the Israelites are in the land of Goshen, which is kind of, again, it's kind of positioned between Egypt and the Promised Land in that bend of the Mediterranean Sea. And so there's a difference made between God and his people and the gods of Egypt and Pharaoh. And so, what's the result of this? Pharaoh sent, and indeed not even one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. Now this is interesting. What's the very next thing that's recorded then is his heart became hard, and he did not let the people go. You've seen, okay, this is number 5, and there's this difference being made now, okay, with the swarms of flies we talked about yesterday. Now with the disease among the livestock, there's a clear distinction made between God and his people and Pharaoh and his gods and his people. And the only thing we're told here is, the only part of the response that we're told here is that his heart became hard. You know, and I suppose we'd like to think, well, you know, if I were Pharaoh, I'd start to believe. And I think it's very easy for us to put ourselves in, to try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and say what we would do in an instance like that, but we need to be very careful that, you know, be careful what you ask for, in the sense of not doing that, of judging Pharaoh. You know, it's kind of like we say sometimes, you know, it's easy for me sitting in an office doing my job to judge how I would respond when going through some terrible event that somebody else is experiencing. We just don't know. But anyway, Pharaoh's heart is hardened here once again. And so this is a fairly short account of this 5th plague, the disease and dying livestock of the Egyptians. But again, it's a strike against one of the gods of Egypt, the sacred bull of Memphis. And then we move on to verse 8 of Exodus chapter 9. We have the 6th plague, the plague of boils, and this plague comes upon everything. And this is kind of an interesting account here too. So I'm going to take time to read the text here, Exodus 9 beginning in verse 8. "So the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it toward the heavens." And I have that underlined because toward the heavens is at the end of verse 8, but then we also see it again, Moses actually doing that, in verse 10. And we'll notice that in just a second. "And it will become fine dust in all the land of Egypt, and it will cause boils to break out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt." Well, they do that. Verse 10, the boils break out. "And the magicians could not stand." Now, I think this is another interesting thing here. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. So, verse 8, and towards the heavens, and also verse 10 could be, okay, this is a possibility. You know, the Bible doesn't specifically speak toward this. But scattering these ashes toward the heavens could be a strike against Shu or Nut. These are gods of the skies or gods of the heavens in Egyptian mythology. And so as a, as a god of the sky, as a god of the heavens. It was a protector god. They were protector gods. And this would be a direct strike at them. Well, what are you going to protect from the God of Moses and Aaron when he takes action? Well, nothing. Again, when you look at the text here, the end of verse 10, they caused boils that break out in sores on man and beast. Everybody in the land of Egypt was affected by this. Or it could be a direct strike against the magicians. Okay, these sorcerers who actually believed. And from so far as I could tell, there's some kind of difference. So the pharaohs believed that they were descendants of the gods. But in some way, the magicians believed that it was believed that the magicians were too, the sorcerers of Egypt, that in some fashion they were descendants of the gods. Well, they couldn't stand before Moses because they themselves were struck with the boils. So where are their gods? That would be the question. And again, all we're told is this: the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. So, we're told in different sections here, Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then like here, the Lord hardened his heart. That's saying the same thing, okay? Pharaoh could have stopped this. All right, he could have submitted himself to God. Now, God, being God, knew that Pharaoh would not. All right, and that's what makes God God. He had the capability of knowing man and knowing responses. Hey, good morning, Miss Barbara. He doesn't let them go. He hardens his heart. And so we have yet another plague, that's number 7, and this is the plague of hail. We're not going to read all of this because it is quite a lengthy account. It's Exodus 9, verses 13 through 35. Well, I've got just a couple things to point out here. So verse 14 indicates something that is different from plague number 7 through plague number 10, from plagues number 1 through 6. All right, so notice what it says here. Verse 14. For at this time I will send all my plagues to your very heart, and on your servants and on your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. That's the first time a statement like this is made in regard to these plagues. It's going to hit you in your heart. All right, so perhaps there could have been some type of explanation for boils. All right, perhaps there could have been some explanation for lice and flies and frogs. But it seems like it's ratcheted up, as we say sometimes, in these 4 remaining plagues. Again, numbers 7 through 10. And it's going to hit them in the heart. But there's another difference too. So earlier, let's see, the 3rd plague, with the plague of lice. Remember, the magician said, "This is the finger of God." So there was some acknowledgement throughout, up until this point of time, that what Moses and Aaron are capable of doing, okay, from the Egyptians' perspective, what these 2 guys are capable of doing, there's something unique about them. And whatever God it is they serve, there's something unique and powerful about him. But it seems, again, from plagues 7, 8, 9, and 10, there's even more convincing that's done, let's say it that way. Because, and it's revealed here in the plague of hail. But let's do this first before we get into that. So it's going to strike you in your heart. Verse 15, now if I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. And I could have just completely wiped you out. But then he says in verse 16, but indeed for this purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. Now this is God speaking. This is what ultimately these plagues are going to do. It's going to be, again, a judgment against all the gods of Egypt, but it's also going to show the power of God himself, that he is in control. And it's like Daniel says several times in his book, that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. That's what these plagues are doing. Pharaoh is where he is because of God. I always think of what Jesus told Pilate. Pilate, in questioning him, said, don't you know that I have power to release you? And Jesus said, you would have no power at all unless it were given to you from on high. What we see throughout the Old Testament, whether it's with Pharaoh or Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar, whatever foreign king it may be, they seem to believe that they themselves were the source of their wealth and power, world dominance, let's say, and they failed to see God in that. And so he tells Pharaoh outright here, he tells Moses outright here, here's what you tell Pharaoh. I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. So this is, 3,500 years ago? We're still talking about it today. God's power is still spoken of today because of these ancient acts that he took. So verse 17, as you yet exalt yourself against my people, and that you will not let them go, behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now. Now, notice this here also in Exodus 9, verse 19. There's a fair warning given. All right, this plague is coming, and it's going to strike at your heart. So here's what you need to do in preparation. Gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, because if you don't, everything out there will die. And so notice the response here. He who feared the word of the Lord, the word of Jehovah, among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. So there is some faith being produced at this point, and we talked about that these signs, that was the purpose of miraculous signs, to produce faith in the witnesses. And we often talk about that in connection with the New Testament, and the Gospel of John, particularly talking about that. But we see this in the Old Testament too. Some of the polytheistic servants of Pharaoh were beginning to believe. All right, so Exodus 9:20 states that. But verse 21, he who did not regard the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. Well, guess what happened there? It was destroyed. Okay, so now also verse 22 tells us that it was against man, beast, herb, and field. Okay, everything left out in the open was going to be struck by God himself. And I suppose we could talk about several different Egyptian gods, but once again, you look at verse 26, only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail. So I lived in Pensacola for 7 years, a little more than 7 years. And there were several times I remember where we lived on one side of town and it was like 8 miles to the church building. Or anywhere you'd go, you could be driving, it would be sunny, it would be clear, and you could see up ahead of you a line. And it would be dry, no indication of anything until you hit that line, and then it was pouring down rain. I remember that happening several times. Of course, the rain would move through and soak everything, but there's a line drawn here with a hailstorm, and there was none in the land of Goshen. There was no hail. Well, the difference continues to be made here. So, in Egyptian theology, let's say, Hathor was the goddess of the sky, and Ra was one of the 4 gods of the sun. Okay, so we see this happening here. Verse 24, the hail mingled with fire, and fire mingled with hail, so very heavy that there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck everything. It was in the field, both man and beast, struck every herb of the field, and broke every tree of the field. All right, so, well, again, this could be against any number of the Egyptian gods. They might be witnessing this just total devastation of everything they've left out and thinking, all right, when is Hathor going to do something? Or when is Ra? Or, again, one of the 4 gods of the sun, depending on where the sun was, is which god it was, when are they going to do something? Well, they couldn't do anything. And again, none of these plagues were lifted until Moses, God's spokesman, Moses and Aaron, said, all right, it's done. We'll do away with it. And that's exactly what we see happening here. And notice what happens here in Exodus 9, verse 33. Moses went out from the city from Pharaoh and spread out his hands to the Lord. Then the thunder and hail ceased, and the rain was not poured on the earth. It's kind of similar to when Christ was on the boat with his disciples in the storm, and he says, "Peace, be still," and immediately it ceased. That's what happens here. There's a difference made, obviously, between Jehovah the God of Moses and Aaron, and the variety of gods of the Egyptians. Well, I think that's where I'll stop today with the plagues, with number 7 there. And hopefully we can come back tomorrow at 11 o'clock and we'll wrap this study up. So let me close this out really quickly and look over here. I see a comment here. Connie says, I wonder how far the Israelites were from the Egyptians. Could they have seen they were all alone and being hit with the plague? Yeah, well, again, you look at your biblical map, and I don't have any doubt that the Israelites could have seen what was going on in Egypt. It was just right there. And you wonder, I guess you would wonder from both sides, from the Egyptian side and also from the Israelite side, what was going through their mind as they saw all the flies over there or the hail, and yet over here it's just completely clear and everything's normal. That would be convincing. Well, you'd think that would be convincing for the Egyptians, but in the same way, that would be convincing for the Israelites too, because they're seeing and hearing all of this, and yet they're free from all of it. And that's an interesting thought too to me, because then you look into the, biblically speaking, you look into the future history of Israel and how unbelieving and rebellious they were even this generation who witnessed all of this. As soon as they get out into the wilderness and face some adversity, they stop believing, they start doubting and questioning God, and they want to go back to Egypt. That's quite an interesting thought too. All right, guys, that's what I've got for today. And so hopefully we can get back here tomorrow, and we will start in Exodus chapter 10, looking at the 8th plague. So I don't see any further questions or comments. We've got a few folks on the Near Churches page. Good to have you guys today. Once the stream is over, you can still access the comment section if you have a question or comment. Thanks for being on here today. And if you would like, or if you know someone who would like to do these studies who does not do Facebook, send them over to our YouTube channel, and all this content is uploaded there. All right, guys. Hope you have a good day. We'll be live tonight at Bible study, 7 o'clock, when we're going to cover, we're going to start in Psalm 27 and looking to cover Psalms 27, 28, and 29. Okay, so hope you have a good day, and hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Have a good day.